You got to remember that on April 11th of 1898, the United States of America declared war on the country of Spain, right? Cuba and Puerto Rico weren't the only things they owned. They also owned the Philippine Islands as well. And so the first military action of the Spanish-American War is not going to occur in Cuba, but it's going to occur in the Philippine Islands. Why? Why are we going over the Philippine Islands? What do we want over there? Why would we even be in that area? What? Yeah, we didn't say anything about not taking the Philippine Islands, did we? We said we wouldn't take Cuba, okay? And so, you got to remember a couple of things. The Philippine Islands had been under the control of Spain since the days of Ferdinand Magellan. Now, nobody in the other class knew who he was. I was a little surprised, because usually they teach you that like in your early elementary years. Anybody know who Ferdinand Magellan was? Help me out.
Spanish explorer.
And what was he the first one to do?
Circumnavigate the world.
Navigate the world by ship. So I'll just give you, you don't have to write this down, but this gives you an idea how long Spain had ruled the Philippines. In search of fame and fortune, Portuguese explorer Ferdinand Magellan set out from Spain in 1519 with a fleet of 5 ships to discover a western sea route to the Spice Islands. Magellan discovered what is now known as the Strait of Magellan, and he became the first European to cross the Pacific Ocean. The voyage was long and dangerous, and only one ship returned home 3 years later. Although it was laden with valuable spices from the east, only 18 of the fleet's original crew of 270 returned with the ship. Magellan himself was killed in a battle on the voyage, but his ambitious expedition proved that the globe could be circled by sea and that the world was much larger than had been previously imagined. So, clear back to 1519, the Philippine Islands are owned by Spain. What's that? Yeah, and he's the first one to sail around the world, but he doesn't make it, right? He dies. So it just gives you an idea. Well, why? What else might be a reason that we decided to go into the Philippines other than a land grab? What about the people there? What do you think the people thought about the government, the Spanish government? What did the people of the Philippines think of the Spanish government? That didn't like them. They were tired of it. But they didn't revolt. So the United States is going to go in there thinking we have two things. The noble thing is to free the Filipinos from this Spanish rule they don't want. But they also had their eyes on land. Now, the person that was most interested in getting these Philippine Islands from the Spanish was a fellow by the name of Theodore Roosevelt, who you've all heard of. At this time in history, he was the Assistant Secretary of the Navy. And he was the man that thought, you know what, I'd like the Philippine Islands. Now, why would this Assistant Secretary of the Navy, Dylan, want the Philippines? Why would he care about the Philippines? What does he want them for? Assistant Secretary of the Navy. What?
Dock ships out there.
Absolutely. He wants them for naval bases and air bases for the United States military, so they have eyes where? In the Far East. Okay, and this is going to come to be a big deal in World War II, which we'll be getting to. So Assistant Secretary of the Navy Theodore Roosevelt hopes to gain control of these islands, the Philippine Islands, because he wants to put future naval bases and air bases in the Far East and have possessions for the United States there to protect world interests. So, Secretary of the Navy, Assistant Secretary of the Navy Roosevelt must have a little bit of power because he orders United States Naval Commander George Dewey to advance to Manila, which is the capital of the Philippines. So because he would like to have the Philippine Islands for naval bases for the United States, Assistant Secretary of the Navy Theodore Roosevelt sends U.S. Naval Commander George Dewey to Manila, which is the capital of the Philippines. Well, what do you think is docked in Manila Bay? What's docked outside the capital city in Manila Bay? What's in there that George Dewey's going toward? Very good, the Spanish fleet. They have a Spanish fleet doctor that's protecting the Philippine Islands, and especially Manila. Well, once he gets to Manila, Dewey and his forces attack that Spanish fleet, and this Spanish fleet is very old and aging, and it just so happened that the U.S. Navy had gotten some new vessels, so it was like new vessels against old, obsolete vessels, and in just a matter of a short period of time, Dewey's Navy sank the Spanish fleet to the bottom of Manila Bay. So once in Manila, Dewey and his forces were ordered to destroy the Spanish fleet stationed at Manila Bay. These aging ships of the Spanish Navy were no match for the new American fleet. And within a short period of time, Dewey's Navy sank the Spanish fleet to the bottom of Manila Bay and captured the capital city of Manila, which basically that was the end of it. From that point on, the United States would have control of the Philippines. Now, three things happened with our victory in the Philippines. What do you think happened to George Dewey after our victory in the Philippines? Well, he had, I don't know if he got a promotion, but he became an instant hero back in the United States. That's the first thing that happened with our victory, is Dewey's stock rises in the military, and he is an instant hero back in the United States. The other thing that happened, we already talked about, we got the cherished naval bases we wanted, okay? So we received the naval bases in the Philippines that the United States had cherished. And what was the other thing that we used as an excuse to go in there? What happened? No, that wasn't our excuse really to go in there. What was our excuse to go in there? Free the Filipino people from Spanish rule. So three things were accomplished with our victory in the Philippines. First of all, Admiral Dewey became a very famous war hero. Number two, the United States had gained control of the naval bases they cherished. And number three, the people of the Philippines were set free from Spanish rule. Well, we still have a war to prepare for and the fighting to be done in Cuba. So that's our next subtopic, is America prepares for war. We got to get prepared. Now, at the outset, the day that we declared war on Spain, on April 11th, 1898, the United States military had 30,000 troops ready to go at a moment's notice. 30,000 troops were available to President McKinley the day we declared war. However, of those 30,000 troops, he sent 17,000 to Tampa, Florida. So of the 30,000 troops that he had immediately available, he sends 17,000 to Tampa, Florida. Why would he do that, Aisha? Why would he send more than half of the troops he has ready to go? Why would he send them to Tampa, Florida?
Maybe as a border, since Florida is close to Cuba.
And what might he be concerned that would be happening in that border?
Spain will attack Florida.
Very good. So he sent those 17,000 troops there to make sure that they were prepared if Spain made the decision to attack Florida, which they did not, but he wanted to be prepared. So only leaves himself with 13,000 troops. So what does he have to do to build up this army? No, not yet. No, he's not going to have to do that. So he's going to do what? Nope, he's going to ask for, if he doesn't draft, he's going to ask for volunteers. 200,000 men volunteer, just like that. Now that shows some patriotism, doesn't it? Do you think that happened today if all of a sudden we got in a conflict and the president asked for volunteers? You think even with our population today we'd get 200,000 people to raise their hand and say, I'll go to war? I would doubt it. Why? What changed that? Probably something called Vietnam, which we'll get to later. But anyway, probably not. But that was pretty good patriotism. He asked for volunteers. Over 200,000 men volunteer to serve in the army during this war, including who's one of our more famous volunteers? Theodore Roosevelt. He resigns his position as Assistant Secretary of the Navy and leads the cavalry in the war. He takes his very protected, not going to get shot at position, quits that position as Assistant Secretary of the Navy, joins the Army, volunteers, and leads a cavalry unit in the war called the Rough Riders. Teddy Roosevelt and his Rough Riders. So one of those 200,000 volunteers was Theodore Roosevelt himself, who resigns his position as Assistant Secretary of the Navy and will lead an American cavalry unit in the Spanish-American War known as the Rough Riders. You know how long this war lasted?
3 months.
A summer long, or 3 months. That's our next subtopic, okay? The Spanish-American War, a summer long. Now, what was the main objective for the American Navy in the Philippines? What was their main objective? To take what? What was their main military objective in the Philippines? To take what? Take what specifically? Manila, the capital city. So there's always a city in a country that you got to take control of. It just so happened that the most important city in Cuba was a port city called Santiago. Santiago was this very important port city in Cuba. And the American objective and the Army objective, remember this is the Army fighting this for the most part, the main objective for the United States Army is to secure the port city of Santiago, because if they do that, they're going to win in Cuba. Now, the city's pretty well protected for two reasons. One is, what do you think's in the harbor at Santiago? Another large Spanish fleet. And also, Santiago was built on a large hill for protection to get the high ground. And that hill was called San Juan Hill. So the city is pretty, fairly well protected. You've got the Spanish fleet in the harbor around the city, and the city is built on a hill for protection. The hill it's built on is known as San Juan Hill. So in order to take the city of Santiago, you're going to have to be able to capture San Juan Hill, advance to the city, and be supported by your Navy, right? Make sense? So, on June 24th of 1898, Spanish and American armies clash as Theodore Roosevelt and the cavalry lead up San Juan Hill. So on June 24th of 1898, both Spanish and American armies will clash, led by Theodore Roosevelt and his Rough Riders, as the American Army attempts to take control of San Juan Hill. Because taking control of San Juan Hill takes control of Santiago. Okay? Well, the fighting goes on for a fairly long period of time. It's hard fighting. There are 1,500 American casualties during this fight. But finally, Santiago will be captured because San Juan Hill has been taken. So again, I'll repeat that. On June 24th of 1898, Spanish and American armies clash. Theodore Roosevelt and his Rough Riders lead the charge of San Juan Hill. After some hard fighting and long fighting and the loss of 1,500 men, the Americans capture the surrounding hills of Santiago, and the city is basically captured by the United States. Now, if you're the Spanish fleet, Dylan, and you see that your city is about to be captured, you got two options. What would they be? Fight or run, right? And the Spanish fleet decides to flee. And the United States doesn't want them to flee, so the USS Oregon, which is a battleship, is ordered to block the Spanish fleet's retreat. So the Spanish fleet has two choices: to engage and try to hold the city, or they can try to retreat and cut their losses. Predicting that they would try to retreat and cut their losses, an American fleet led by the battleship USS Oregon is ordered to cut off the Spanish fleet's escape. They get there on time, and again, because of the difference in age of ships, in a very short period of time, the Americans sank the Spanish fleet to the bottom of Santiago Bay. So it's a complete victory for the United States. although it took the city of Santiago a week after the sinking of the Spanish ships to actually surrender formally. Okay? So they capture the hill, they basically got Santiago captured, they have it surrounded. The Spanish fleet tries to escape, the USS Oregon along with some other help, cut them off, sink them to the bottom of Santiago Bay, and a week later, the city of Santiago surrenders. So during the course of what was just one long summer, the Spanish-American War ends. You know, I think I forgot to tell you this yesterday. I told the other class. The battle, USS Maine that was sunk, that started this whole thing, the mast, you know what the mast of a ship is, the lookout? The mast of the USS Maine is in Arlington National Cemetery, very close to the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier and by the amphitheater. What it is it's the original mast surrounded by a memorial for those 260 American sailors that lost their lives during that attack. It's pretty cool. You can see the original mast right there. You'll see it. Some in less than a year and some in about a year. So that takes us to our next subtopic then, which is the spoils of war for the United States. What does that mean? Andy, what's that? Spoils of war. What do you get? What do you get out of the deal? What do we gain? Okay? There's actually 4 things we gain. 2 of them you've heard of. What are the 2 things we've gained so far? We've gained freedom for the Cubans and the Puerto Ricans, right, from Spanish rule. Because when we defeated the Spanish, although the fighting was done in Cuba, it also freed the Puerto Ricans as well. So that was our first thing. That was our first spoil of war, is we freed the Cubans and the Puerto Ricans from Spanish rule. What was our second spoil of war we already talked about? What do we gain out of this? What's that? Philippine Islands. Now this is kind of interesting, kiddos, because even though we took the Philippine Islands early in the Spanish-American War, when the war ended, we actually gave Spain $20 million for the Philippines. Did we have to do that? No. Why do you think we did that then?
So they weren't super mad.
What?
So they weren't super mad about it?
Well, and also, so there was they had no claim to them that we got them unlawfully, so to speak, right? In other words, it made sure they were ours. So if Izzy lends me a book with the idea that you can, you know, and she says, well, Mr. Greer, you can kind of keep this if you want, and I don't know Izzy that well, I'll rephrase this. I had an older gentleman in town, this is a perfect example, said, here, I got a book for you I want you to read on World War II. It's a neighbor of mine. He brought over, I thought, gave it to him. You know, if you give somebody a book, if I give you a book, Jordy, I'm not expecting you to give it back. You know, that's kind of the deal. So I read through this book and lose it, basically, which I don't normally do. I'm sure it's in here somewhere. And what's the guy want? He wants his book back. So I have to buy him another book, which I did, which was hard to find, by the way, because his book was signed, and I had to look for a signed book. But I had to buy him a book, and I think your thought process would be, well, gee whiz, what kind of a jerk is Mr. Durr stole this old guy's book? Well, that wasn't my assumption. So you see my point here. We could take the islands because we got it, but we didn't want them coming back and being critical of us and having people being sympathetic to them. So we cleared our conscience and said, here's $20 million, they're ours. And we never have to worry about it. So that's what we did. Didn't have to, but we did. What else did we gain? We've kind of talked about. We said we wouldn't take Cuba, right? But did we say we wouldn't take Puerto Rico? No. So we took Puerto Rico. That's why Puerto Rico is an American possession right now. It's because we took them after the Spanish-American War. I've always wondered why we've never brought that territory in as a state. I'm not sure. I think some of the conflict in the Caribbean might be part of it, but we've had them for a long time, have we not? Puerto Rico? So we took Puerto Rico. We also took another very important island in the Pacific Ocean called Guam. Now, Guam is not part of the Philippines, but why would we want an island in the middle of the Pacific called Guam? Absolutely, a military base, and that will come up in World War II. We want some presence in the Pacific Ocean because we want to be kind of close to Japan because they're a little quirky, right? We want to have some presence in the Far East, so we'll take the Philippines. We'll also take this really important island, Guam, because it'd be a wonderful air and military base, naval base for the United States. So that's what we gained. First of all, we gained freedom for Cubans and Puerto Ricans from Spanish rule. Secondly, we gained the Philippine Islands, and we paid $20 million to make sure they were ours. We also gained possession of the country of Puerto Rico and possession of the island of Guam, which was a Spanish possession in the Pacific Ocean. Now, probably the guy that was most tickled about this war was John Hay, who was Secretary of State. He thought this war was awesome. Matter of fact, he thought that the spoils of war were so good for the United States as a result of the Spanish-American War that he referred to the Spanish-American War as, quote, that splendid little war. That splendid little war that got us Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. So after the war, Secretary of State John Hay referred to the Spanish-American War as, quote, that splendid little war. Any questions on that, Miss Warner? All right, well, even though you have a war, you have to have a presidential election, so that's the one we're talking about now, the election of 1900. Now, those of you that are tiring of taking notes, just keep in mind I've had to lecture this twice.
Mr. Durr, I think about Canada's against the rule.
Well, when we could do that, and then anybody that brings anything in here that you do, obviously, without lids, I could hammer on it.
Was it report?
Oh, okay. Well, I wasn't sure. All right, the election of 1900. Now, has President McKinley done a pretty good job for the Republicans the last 4 years? He's done an exceptional job. So there is no question who the Republicans are going to nominate for president. They're going to nominate President McKinley for re-election. The question becomes, who are the Republicans going to nominate for vice president? That was the big controversy. Now, we haven't done a profile on Theodore Roosevelt yet, but you'll learn more about him. But he was a guy that you kind of either liked